Hey everybody, it's Pooch Van Druten, and
This is Chris Rabold. I feel like it's been a long time since I've said that to you.
I know.
Chris Rabold.
It has been a long time. We've just run into a lot of busy stuff, you know. Life gets busy even when we don't really have jobs.
Even when it's a bullshit life.
Episode 38, this one is. It's been a couple weeks. You know, I know that for me, it's been crazy. Like I've been doing mixing a bunch of projects. So that's been good.
We hadn't talked about that in a while. You had the we literally haven't spoken in a while.
I know. But been keeping me busy, you know.
That's good.
So yeah, it's good, and keeping my chops up, and you know, I've been doing a lot of stuff with Waves. There's a couple of new plugins that are coming that I've written some presets for, and so that's exciting. Waves is going to release some new things, and
plugins or just new
plugins. There's a couple of new plugins coming that I just wrote some presets for that are going to get released here in the next week, I think.
Oh, cool.
So yeah,
right on.
Should be fun. And yeah, so I've been busy and you've been busy. You've been doing you were mixing a bunch of projects and doing stuff as well, right?
Yeah, I guess not that I look back on it too. I was talking to somebody the other day and they're like, "Where are you?" And I was like, "Well, I'm in Texas at this church." And they're like, "What? Okay." And then I said, "Well, what's something last week?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I had to go do this event up in Pittsburgh." And And they're like, "Yeah, you're working." And I was like, "Well, I'm not, but I guess I am a little with respect to, you know, whatever."
I mean, it's, you know, you're taking whatever you can get to go do those things. Pittsburgh, you did a Biden rally or something?
Yeah, I did a thing with Lady Gaga there. It was simple. It was just her and piano. It was great. It was on SD5 with Waves. I mean, it was super simple. She sounded amazing. You know, it was freezing cold outside. It was 35 degrees outside.
Yeah.
So all day long. But
you said it was Leo or Lion or something?
It was Leo. And it sounded great. And I could only hear one side of the PA. You know, it was super. It's so weird, man. It's like, you know, we're doing these gigs now, and that's the first like drive-in gig I've done. And I was getting ready to say hopefully last, but no, I hope I do a million more of them if they pay money. But
if they pay money, then we'll do it.
It was, but it was weird. It was like this super spread out parking lot. Anyway, I was off to one side, but man, it sounded great. I put two filters on it during tuning, and man, it sounded amazing. It sounded amazing.
So people, I haven't done a drive-in thing. So people are in their cars, or are they getting out of their car?
No, it was weird. Okay. So yeah, good question. So they're in their cars, but they're welcome to get out of their cars, at least at this particular event. So my mix was going, it went everywhere. It went to whoever the production company was, someone out of Iowa, and it went to them for streaming. So it went to all the news sources, to his website, to blah, 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 blah. It went everywhere. And then there was an FM broadcast that went to the cars if people want to listen to their car. And then there was the normal mix that, you know, there was all the same mix, but yeah, those were all the different places that it went. So it was weird.
So they were doing an FM broadcast of it, so people could tune into 98.5 and listen to stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. Interesting.
Exactly.
Cool. Because I was like, okay, so people are in their cars and you're mixing a lot.
I know.
It's reflecting off of windows of cars.
Right. The whole thing is just so weird. I mean, it's just so weird.
Yeah. But it's what it is. I mean, as long as people are willing to, you know, do shows, then
yeah.
But
and it was cool being there too, seeing like the crew, this particular crew. I can't remember the name of the company. They're awesome dudes. Well, I know like Blackhawk Audio had the audio, but the overall production company, they had been out, like they'd kind of been on tour for 2 weeks doing rallies and stuff like that. And I was like, man, good on you guys, you know, for getting out there. And they were like, God, we're so grateful for it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a fair amount of that kind of work happening, you know, between churches and kind of corporate stuff. There's you know, there's some of that happening at least. So that's kind of good news. I mean, you know, we'll see what happens after the first of the year, and hopefully we get some more of those, and people are more willing to come out. But, you know, we're in this weird second wave or third wave or whatever it is right now.
Right.
So I'm sure that'll shut us down. There's a bunch of states right now that are closing
for
down
sure
for a couple of weeks at least.
For sure.
So anyway, yeah, it's an interesting time. Did you read that Billboard Billboard magazine ran a whole kind of article that was really long? It was like 20-minute read about the live event industry. Like finally they wrote something.
No.
Really, really interesting, but really, I don't know. It was kind of a bummer. I read it and it's all true facts. And that's why it was a bummer. I was like reading it and just kind of going, yep, that's true. That's true. That's true. But yeah, it's pretty interesting how in the article, they're talking about what a lot of us have done to pivot to, you know, to try to, you know, make a living. And they were interviewing a front of house guy that's like, you know, literally like chopping up chickens at a chicken place.
Sure.
For $17 an hour. And we, you know, we talk about that here all the time. It's like, do whatever you got to do, man. Keep moving, you know, pay your bills for your family and then, you know, come back. So, you know, that's what we're trying to do and fill it in. You know, I'm trying to do as many mixed gigs as I can get and keep going.
Yeah. Totally.
What do you want to talk about this episode 38?
Yeah, let's like keep it. I want to make it fun and make it simple. And let's talk about everybody's favorite input. Let's go back to the kick drum.
Input number one.
Input number one. You know, we've gone down. We started this thing and we went here and we went there and we went there. And then we talked business and then we've talked COVID and now we've done this. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, man, let's just talk about like the most basic mixing element thing that is so nuanced as well when you get to that input number one. You know what I mean? So I think we can get something out of this.
It's funny. Input number one, kick drums. To me, it's weird. Kick drums to me are the most ignored drum by a drummer as far as tuning and how they sound.
Yep.
Like to me, they'll spend hours like tuning toms and snare drum and all that kind of stuff and just ignore like what a kick drum should sound like. And when you finally get an amazing sounding kick drum, one that you don't have to put a bunch of crap on and EQ the crap out of and, you know, decide to use weird microphones and all kinds of stuff. It's like, thank God,
thank you.
I've got this amazing sounding kick drum, you know? And really, I got to tell you, probably in my 30-year career, there's been like 5 in 30 years where I've been like almost no EQ.
And you almost feel like something's wrong.
Yeah.
When you're not doing much, you're like, well, this can't be right. You know?
Yeah. Because that's funny, right? Do you find yourself, I find myself doing the most extreme EQ on kick drums, right?
Depending on the drum. Yeah. But I think we get where that comes from. If you're not in a great listening environment, like if you're on a riser, elevated on a stage in a concrete cave, when you kick that thing, it sounds like nothing.
Yeah.
Like you don't hear tone, you don't hear note, you definitely don't perceive low end. You really have to be in the right place with a kick drum, a bass drum to really hear what it's doing, you know? So it is easy to and the flip side of that too is for engineers, live engineers. If we know we have 800 subs in front of us, we can take that nothing kick sound and at least make it experientially just dominant. So it's kind of like everyone's slacking because we know it can at least work out, but it might not be the best thing to do, you know?
Yeah. That's funny because I find myself when I have a really good sounding kick drum, those are the times where I'm like turning down the sub by like 9 dB to, you know, to make it sound great, you know, whereas just like you said, you utilize subs to try to make up for something that's not there, or even
it's not there.
I've used you know, like Waves low air to try to
Mhm.
manufacture something that isn't there. You know, and it's unfortunate. I shout out to all those drummers out there, like focus on the kick drum, man, get that sounding great.
Mhm.
You know, the best sounding kick drum I ever heard was Abe Laboriel Jr. had a kick drum by this company called GMS, and it was an unbelievable sounding kick drum. I was just like, you stood in front of it and you went, that acoustically is what a kick drum is supposed to sound like, you know?
Yeah.
And like literally no EQ, you put, you know, one microphone on it and it was amazing. So
It's
what's
funny.
is your typical go-to microphone for kick drum, a 91? I mean, that's like what everybody uses.
Yeah. I mean, for the live thing, if we've got two mics, it's always a 91. These days I like the Beta 91A. The one that, you know, it's been through several versions. I've carried my own SM91A for years, until just like a year or two ago, I finally just gave in and said, okay, fine, we don't have to use it.
That's funny because I gave in too, but I know it's not as good for me anyway. I don't like the Beta as much as the original 91.
The first Beta that came out was just like an 800 hertz machine. Like that thing was wrong in every way.
Why would you want that?
It was so wrong. Then they've improved it since.
They totally have.
The new one is.
I'm not saying it's horrible. I'm not saying it's horrible.
No,
I'm just saying
you're right. It's
like if you're a new engineer and you haven't heard the old school 91, the one that has the small, you know, 3-pin
pain in the ass connector
in it with a transformer on the other end of it.
Yeah.
That particular microphone, the old school 91, if you compared that to a Beta 91, you'd be like, whoa, know, this is a way superior microphone. But I've gave in too, because it's like the design of the new 90, the Beta is just easier. You know, you plug an XLR into it and it's not horrible. It's like, it's good.
It is.
It's just that you look back on the old one and, you know, just like we look back on analog consoles and go, oh yeah,
right.
Consoles are good too. But
totally.
We can still get a great result though.
Absolutely. Yep. So I'll do that. I'll do a Beta 91A is the first one. And then I'll use, whatever I'm into at the time for the second mic. You know, I think you and I both these days are kind of into the V-Kick, the SC Electronics. That tends to be the one, but it's usually paired with one. Now, I'll tell you something about me that's interesting. More times than not, I don't blend. I just pick when it comes to kick drums. Now, snare drums, unless it's the most wonderfully tuned snare drum in the world, you know, with like snare top and bottom, I might use 2 or 3 mics on it. But if it's really wonderfully done, you don't need that snare bottom. But that's another thing that for some reason gets thrown out the window live is proper snare tuning. But with kick drums though, oftentimes it's like, I don't know why, it's like I can get it to work. I can find the blend. And then, you know, I'll find that blend and then I'll bust that blend and then work on that blend more EQ wise. But sometimes I will just convince myself that there's something phase wise I just can't get to lock. And I'll like, you know what? I know there are no phase anomalies if I just use one. So a lot of times I will default to just one, but yeah, I'm pretty generic in the sense of what I use. One thing I want to say real quick though, which you mentioned, talked about using low air or something to fabricate low end. It's astonishing how many, and this just goes back to your first point, how many kick drums that get used live, if we took those into a studio, it would literally be like, when are you going to quit fucking around? That is unusable. And it is just this pock. There's no low end coming out of it. None. You know, I had to do it was for a streaming thing I did recently, a mix, and the kick drum, I too couldn't get anything. I mean, I could take every filter in the world and just crank it. And I ended up using Brainworks BX subsynth to generate this, you know, to do this thing. You know, I had to make low end. There was literally no low end there. So
amazing.
And that's so often. But I get it. The guys hit it, and if they've got a sub next to them, it goes boof, you know, or in the ears, it's passable, or out front, we fuck with it till it gets somewhere. But guys, that's not okay. That's not, your drum should have low end.
Yeah, that's not okay. Like, you know, the drum to me, a great sounding snare drum sounds great acoustically, right? When you're in front of it, when the snare drum really cracks when you're standing in front of it, not listening to microphones, just sitting there acoustically, you know, when you put microphones on it, it's going to be, that's going to be a great sounding drum. It's the same thing with kick drums. Like I don't understand the whole, you know, drummer sitting there, you know, kidding it. And I can stand there and like, literally I'll do one of these, like,
right.
Really? Like you think that sounds cool? Huh.
Right.
And you know, I mean, we have lots of tools to get impact out of kick drum and to manufacture low end and, you know, all those kind of things. But man, it's so much better when you don't have to induce, you know, I've had kick drums where I'm like literally 6 to 9 dB boost of 60 hertz.
Oh, easy.
Like 12 dB cut of 400.
Oh, easy.
And 2K boost of like 4 dB of 2K, and then, you know, whatever, and some other click, you know, 4K or 3K,
something
another
else,
you know, 4 dB. And that's just extreme EQ, and the amount of phase that you're inducing by using that extreme amount of EQ could all be solved by someone having a great sounding drum.
Yeah, I forgot what I did recently during COVID, and there was a bunch of different sources, and I was like, "Oh, don't care." Plus 12 on the bottom. That's what we're doing, you know.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, we talk about here that it's like you do whatever you have to do, right? Like, I don't look at that and go, "Oh no, I can't do that." I look at that and go, "Okay, does it sound good or not?" But I'm just saying, in the big scope of things, it's like, you know, the amount of phase that you're inducing in your mix is retarded by doing that much.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. What about you? Do you ever use like sub kicks or any of that kind of stuff?
I don't like any of that stuff. However, I will tell you, just to take us back a little bit, I am usually not a single input kick drum guy, but what I am is a single input that is the main focus, like the main thing, which is usually the 91.
Like it's not a 1-to-1 of your two mics.
No. Definitely not of the two.
Me neither.
It's definitely a single input that is kind of the focus, which is usually the 91. And then, like we talked about, the V kick, or I like the M82, old school M88. But I take all of those microphones, believe it or not, and low pass them way down and use the mic that is in the whole of the kick drum to be mostly sub information.
Interesting.
And sometimes, depending on what's happening, I'll take the 91 and high pass it so that there's kind of a crossover point there between the two microphones. Because I find that having one microphone, especially the microphone that's in the whole of the kick drum, be kind of the focus of the air movement, translates better into what's happening in subs for me than a boundary microphone that's on the bottom of the kick drum and capturing, you know, it's a capsule that's pointed like right at the beater. And oftentimes doesn't have the whole resonance of the kick drum. So I find that if I use the microphone that's out, you know, in the hole of the kick drum and it's further away from the beater, still pointed at the beater, but capturing all the resonance of the kick drum, and low passed down is often a better sounding sub information for me. But it's generally most of the time I do not high pass the 91. I'm still using the information that's down in there with the 91 and then use the mic that's in the whole of the kick drum to supplement just the sub information underneath it to kind of give it more of a round thing. And if you muted the 91, it would sound not good. Right. You know what I mean? It would sound like just, just the low, 40, 50 hertz of that, not any of the click, not any of the other stuff. And it would be like significantly lower in volume than what the 91 is.
Right.
And that's typically my kick drum sound. I've had to do weird things, of course, depending on how the drum sounds, you know. I've done what you described earlier where, you know, I only use the V kick or the M82, the Telefunken M82, and abandoned the 91 because of the way that the drum sounded. You know, it just depends. But generally, when I'm talking about what is my kick drum go-to starting place, is a 91 being the main focus, and then the outside microphone being the supplemental low-end sub stuff.
Yeah. And I do that too. I don't do the or I don't do that too. I do something similar where it's 9 times out of 10, if there's a blend, the 91 is leading. Like, is it 0? And I just close my eyes and I pull up on that. Something I do different with my kicks than I do, say, my snares, for example. And it's an easy comparison to keep going between these two, because they both are, you know, multiple microphones on one source in the way that we're speaking that then form this one greater sound, blah, 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 blah. When I do it with snares, my individual snare inputs are usually, they're gated if they're gated, and they're almost always gated. There's on certain occasions, the snare top is not gated. But I usually don't do much of anything other than corrective, subtractive EQ. I might maybe do a few little bumps here or there on those, but then I do the really heavy lifting once it gets grouped. In other words, I'll like make this sound, and then I go, okay, that sound, that's what we're going to work on heavily, because I know my propensity with kick drums, which is to blend them, but then also at a certain point to turn one off. I kind of can't afford to do that. So I will process them aggressively as individually. You know what I mean? So like kick 1 has all the shit on it. Kick 2 has all the shit on it. And when they meet in a bus, usually all I'm doing there is maybe some peak limiting. Sometimes I'll do that to make it harder and to make it just, you know, louder, and some EQ. But as far as like more gentle compression or just compression in general or saturation, all that kind of stuff, it occurs on the individual input for me.
Yeah, I think that's the case for me as well. Always with multiple, I'm just like you, always with multiple microphones, they get summed to an individual group, usually a mono group. So like kick and snare are going to mono groups, right? So 2 microphones on the kick drum end up in a mono kick drum group. 2 mics on the snare drum end up in a mono group. And the processing that's happening on the mono group is not as much as the other stuff, which I think is just what you said, right? The individual channels are getting most of the stuff. Now, for me though, like I'll do gating generally on the group.
Ooh,
like,
interesting.
Yeah.
And you know what? I remember that when we did that thing not too long ago. I remember I noticed that. See, that's one thing, and I totally get it. I've just never done that. I get that.
I hate even when gates are linked. To me, there's something about that doesn't, the attack on it and then the release times, even though they're supposed to be linked, still never sound right to me. So I feel like one gate over the 2 inputs has the sound of the gate that I want, which, by the way, we should talk about that, because a gate on a kick drum is an additional EQ.
Is everything. Yeah, let's do that. Like, let's go there now. Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like, you know, the gate with its attack all the way down has this click noise that we want. I want that sound from a kick drum. I want it to have this 2K click sound that, or 1K even, that comes from the actual opening of the threshold of the gate. Without that, it's not as cool, right?
Yep. And it's funny, this goes back to every gate ever made, and they all have their different sound.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Every gate, going back to whatever.
Like I was a big drummer guy. Those were the ones, right?
The way the drummer opened had its own, and it's a pop, which I love that in your mind, even though it's been months, that you went from 2 to no 1, because you're right. It's a pop.
Yeah.
And they all sound different. And on most all gates, I will default to fastest attack.
Yeah.
On a very few, I'll kick them back just a hair. And I got to be honest with you, in Digico, I have started kicking only on snares. excuse me, only on kicks. Their default, I believe, is like 0.5.
Yeah.
And I think that's like microseconds. I don't think it's 0.5 milliseconds. I can't remember what it is. And I've started going to the next one, which is 0.121.
Huh.
I've just decided.
What does it do for you?
It has less. There's something about the Digico soft pop on a errant, didn't mean to open one that is just the most amateur sounding thing in the world. I hate it when I hear it in a PA. When I hear that, like where a kick gate almost, it did open, but not full. I just think it's the worst.
I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And I hear it on the sound as a whole. So I've just started pulling it back just on it doesn't bother me on anywhere else. It's only on the kicks, but kicks also have, to me, I think they have the fastest and most pronounced transient that's combined with that pop. And I think that's why it makes me do that. Now, okay, here's another great question. Do you find yourself more times than not getting similar values on hold and release? Or is it just kind of, if you have to think, then probably not. I have these like places I'll go, the old school way to do it was just like fast attack, fast hold, fast release. And it's just this, because again, it works in live sound.
Sure.
But were you,
it's funny, like early on in my career, I was that guy, and maybe it was because of the gates that I had. I just want to say that it was funny because you mentioned that all gates have their own kind of tone. And even within Drummer back in the day, they had one that was like 4 gates in a single.
That thing was just, oh God, I can't wait to hear you talk about this. Right.
Anyway, it had different, it sounded a lot different than the one that had 2.
I disliked it so much. The way it sounded, that's why I started using BSS quad gates.
Yes.
Because, big hug.
I know, big hug. Well, I would literally, you would look at the spec of like doing a club gig or whatever.
Yes.
And you would say, it has Drummer gates. Oh, cool. I'm good. And then I would show up and they would have the 4-banger one. And I'd be like, oh.
Because the fast was too over the top poppy. Yeah. If I recall correctly, right? The fast was just way too much. It sounded like it sounded like a phantom powered input was being unplugged. Yes. And then the slow was too slow. So that led me to go, I actually purchased a bunch of BSSs because I was like, man, Drummer, come on. That's funny to hear you say that.
The reason that I'm saying that is now in, digital technology, of course, every digital console kind of has their own sounding gate. And I will actually sometimes, I am a big proponent of using onboard gating, right?
Yeah, me too.
Any input that needs a gate, I'm not looking for a plugin to do that usually. But I will tell you that there are some kick drums that for whatever reason, the Digico gate just didn't sound right.
Yeah. And
I've actually gone to a plugin like, Waves makes a BSS version, and some other ones that have that gate sound that I want. It's not just about gating and, making it be a gated thing. It's about the opening of that gate. I want this particular sound that I'm looking for. So if you haven't experimented with that, I tell you, don't just assume that the gate on your console is the best choice. Definitely have it in your toolbox that there are some other ones and why they sound different and how they sound different. So you can have that in your toolbox.
Something else, while we're talking about this, what's something that's important for me, the way that I go about gating, and again, particularly on the kick drum, is of course we want that threshold as low as we can get it for a number of reasons, so that the lightest hit can go. And also because the lower we're getting with that threshold, the more we're ensuring we're getting real, true transient passing through. Right. And, I will do part of my A/B with the gate as a whole before we even get into hold and release and what happens after this attack is what does it sound like with the gate off? What is the attack of the drum? Because ultimately there's plenty of drums out there. There's not that much snare in there. I just can't use it ungated. It'll feed back.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's what so if anyone's listening to this and maybe you're not a live sound guy and ended up in this weird place with us. It's not just that. Welcome. Hire us at your gas station. We have to use these things because, again, it's because like it'll feed my kick drum in an arena or a stadium or even a club or whatever is going to feed back more times than not if I don't gate it.
Yeah, and mainly it's because we are adding all of that kind of low sub information and
it's on a resonance.
Impact.
Yep. And it's who knows what's happening on that stage and around it and everywhere else. So that's why we're doing this. But part of my A/B process is, what does the natural attack of that kick drum sound like when the gate is not engaged? And my goal is, when popping it in, is to, as best as possible, make it to where there's not very much tonal difference. Or if there is one, it's like what you're talking about. It's like it adds that, particularly if it's a certain style of music, it actually adds a little more excitement to it.
Yeah.
I
used to be, we were talking earlier about hold and release. And I used to be that guy that was like, real short hold times, real short release times, where like if you soloed the kick drum up, it would be a thuck, pretty much like not a whole tone. And I utilized it within the whole mix of everything. So like, snare drum would have a little bit, gating would be loose and you'd hear a little bit of the kick drum in it, and the overheads would have some kick drum in it. So soloing up the kick drum would be like really, quick thack, but in the scope of the everything, you didn't notice that it was that. That's how I used to do it. I'm way more that guy with longer hold times and release times now. Basically, depending, it's not like I change it per song, but whatever the song is that has the tempo that's kind of the fastest, I'm adjusting hold and release times to right up to where the snare drum is. Do you know what I mean? So like the kick drum has this boom section and then there's snare drum, boom, pack. And I want the gate to close right before the snare drum.
Yes.
And so I'll spend a bunch of time like messing with that kick drum gate to find that. And then, as we get into rehearsals or whatever, and all of a sudden there's this really fast song, I'll start to notice that there's some kick drum there's some snare drum in the kick drum microphone, and I'll tighten up those release times just a little bit to try to eliminate that. That's kind of my thought process. What's yours on hold and release?
For sure. I guess I think of it two different ways. I'm thinking of it, what you mentioned, how much snare's coming through there. And it's always going to be the snare, that's the loud thing that's going to be coming through there. So I definitely want to miss it. Or if I'm not going to miss it because everything's super fast tempo, like I kind of get to a point where I embrace it, but I want to embrace it consistently. Me too. I mean, there's a point where the song is so fast that you're like, you can't, you lose the whole tone of the kick drum by trying to, get the hold and release up to where the snare drum is. But generally that's what I'm saying I do. Something that I noticed a long time ago that I'm always aware of is I did, because I too at first was like, and this was just from like glancing at other people's whatever IntelliGates and going, everything's set on fast, I guess I'm supposed to do that, and what were those Aphex? There was the Aphex. The 612s and the club had. Those were the worst gates on the planet. 612s and the 622s. Those were their like pro models, which I did like, only the fact that it had expansion options on it. Because Drummer was just on or off. But one thing I noticed, this was more later in so this is probably 15 years ago when we're starting to get into digital desk. And also because at that point in time, we have like very accurate statistical readouts as far as what the times are. But I noticed if I'd open up a kick drum and let it, like, let's just say either it was the resultant time between the hold and the release, or the hold was like next to nothing, and I was really just working off the release. That's a whole other conversation, how to work hold and release. But somewhere around 300 milliseconds, I felt like I'd always get more low end. And there might be some, in my mind, the logic, because I've found it time and time and time again, the logic to it, the science to it, has something to do with the length is of the wavelength of these low frequency sources, that, you know, that we are literally chopping off part of the wave when we're chopping them too short. You're not getting, that's part of the reason you're not getting all the low end. You haven't allowed the wave to develop fully. So anyway, it's something of mine where it's shocking how many times, you know, I'll close my eyes and hold it and be like, okay, not only is the snare in an okay place, but I swear I just got more low end, and it's somewhere around that 300. I also have this thing with 300 where, you know how if you get a kick that has a lot of times, it almost has like a rebound sound to it. It's like, boo, boo, boo. A lot of times I will lengthen my compression hold, or release rather, longer than I usually would on a drum input, because I'm trying to suppress that. So I'm trying to make a transient pass, and then that rebound wave, I want to keep it down. Right. So anyway,
so it doesn't release quickly. It goes compression and then.
Yep. So any other bullshit that's hanging out in there, or resonance from a sub or something, kind of hangs out before it can come up. But that's kind of where I go with gating, is on the kicks rather. I kind of try to give it as much as I can. And also, as much as we talk about nowadays, that like, whether it's a broadcast mix or just a board mix or something, those little quick pips, those don't sound good when played back in real life. You know,
it's true. It's true. You know, you got into compression a little bit, and, you know, we should say that, you know, I use compression on kick drums for the most part. It really depends. If there is a drummer that's very dynamic, where he goes from being really digging into stuff to barely hitting the kick drum, I kind of fix that, because it really doesn't work in live sound. Like, I'll use a compressor to try to rein that dude in. I don't want to get rid of his dynamics, his or her dynamics. I want dynamics, but the extreme dynamics don't translate very well in a kick drum.
No, they literally push. They push the whole audience and pull, and it's like something's wrong sound.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So compression is also a big tool for me in regards to kick drum, but the settings on a compressor are exactly opposite in regards to attack than what a gate is. I want, on the attack of a gate, I want that click. I want it to, you know, to open up as quickly as possible. Whereas the attack of a compressor, I don't want to clip the transient. I want the transient to come through and then compression to happen. So for me, attack is not all the way up on the compressor part of it. It's like even at like 50%, like I want transient and then some compression to happen. So just so you guys know, those are kind of opposite settings when you're talking about attack on gating versus compression, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And that's a tough one too. Like what you're talking about, if you've got a guy or gal who's dynamic with their foot, man, that is a pain in the ass, because there's like, it's tough. Well, there's dynamic with purpose, and then there's just you're emoting through that instrument. Like, don't show us all how excited you just got, because musically you just took the whole piece and started like shoving it up against the wall.
That's exactly right.
And I'm with you. I want to use, if I'm going to use compression on a kick drum or any element, I would hope, you know, you're either using it creatively or you're using it constructively.
You're using it to like fix something, or you're using it artistically.
And the artistic way is to really let it go. But then when you're talking about in that situation, you're like, well, I want to let the transient go, but not too much, because the guy's out of control. So you end up with this. I've started doing more. For the longest time, I didn't do anything. Kick drums were just like saturation, and that was usually like it. That was all I'd really do. And now I've gotten to this thing, like my new chain is I'll do something saturation-y if I have it available to me, or if I think I need it. If it's a great drum, I don't need shit. But if I think it's going to help, I'll do something on the saturation end. We can talk about what that is. But since we're talking about
front end of the kick drum, so like the way 91,
the way I think of it is this is like that. I think of it as it's like a recording path. So the place that I'm going to saturate first is going to be at the very, 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 very beginning. And it's as if it went through some path of a console or a tape machine or a series of whatevers, transformers, whatever. So that usually goes first.
So do you use the tube setting on Digico? Do you use that to saturate?
Somebody was asking me that recently. I've only recently got, when they first came up with it, I was like, fuck this thing. And then I think it's because I always had access to like kind of cool other things. But then last year I was doing some gigs where it was, I don't even remember anymore. I think it was last year where I was doing some gigs where, where I was like picking up just whatever. And I didn't have any choice, and I did. And so I started embracing more of the Digico stuff. And I know that I think it's like 13 and 7 on the drive and the, there's somewhere in there. So, but no, I'll use, like, for instance, like on Waves, I'll use, if it's hardware, I'll go to my stock stuff, which is all of that overstayer stuff. And on Kick, it's usually like a parallel version. It's not full on, just it's like I kind of roll it back a little. But I'll use in Waves, I'll do this. I'll go to the J37.
Yeah.
If I have it. But now here's an interesting thing on that J37. There is the finest of fine lines between, I just added cool girth, usable low end, and just pillow distortion. And it's like, it's the finest of fine lines. So I'll usually do that. I'll put like that J37 first, and then I'll gate it. Or wherever it comes in. But let's just say the chain is, forget where the gate is for a second, the distortion, because I'm establishing what the sound is. Then when I get into compression, I've started going back to like DBX 160, like the VUs, the old school ones. And I do that, and it's purely for tonal reasons. I do it because it makes, you talked about like a 2K gain you can get from a gate. Those older compressors like that just have that knock. And if you can make the needle just move a little, it does, you're grinning, you know what I'm talking about. It does that thing like in the upper mids where it just kind of, it gets harder. It may actually suck out a little low end, to be honest with you. They do. And so I'll do that, and that lets a little transient pass. And then I'll like take it into, and then now here I've gone from the guy that didn't do any compression on my kick drum to then I'll take it into, if it goes into some sort of like SSL type channel, whether it's Waves or Brainworks or UA or whatever. And I will incorporate on their slow attack, which is slow as shit. It's 30 milliseconds. Yeah, you know, it's like a bus compressor. Yeah. So then I'm doing it again once in a blue moon. Though I will find that if it is a guy that's like really erratic, I will use their fast attack there, and I'm using that compressor more as an endpoint limiter of sorts.
I totally get it.
Then I'll do some EQ, and then that's what I was saying earlier. And then sometimes on the group, I will even incorporate some like L2 type modern, super fast ass, like, nope, don't go anywhere. And that's a whole sound unto
itself. You're going to clip the tops off and just keep you in check.
Right.
Yeah,
sorry, it's a long-winded answer.
No, it's fine. I have a theory behind why we do that. And the theory is that with old school analog consoles, they're usually VU meters, not peak meters. And we didn't ever have true a visual representation of what peak was when we were younger. And so what that meant was that a lot of times we would take analog mic pre's and turn them up to where a VU meter kind of looks right, like at minus 10 or whatever, minus 20 for a transient thing, and just making sure that the red clip light isn't turning on. And really what that was doing was inserting a bunch of harmonic distortion, because the actual peak of what that transient was like totally blowing up the mic pre. We just didn't know it. We didn't have the tools. And so the sound of a kick drum or a snare drum has what we think is a great sounding kick drum and a snare drum has a real fair amount of harmonic distortion in it. And the front end of most of these consoles these days, these digital consoles, don't have any of that. So you and I are trying to manufacture that sound, that, you know, the typical sound. And this was true of records too. It's not just about live sound. You know, back then when they were making records on a Neve 8078, for instance, you know, it was all VU meter and there wasn't really a peak light. And that was the tone of that mic pre, was this insertion of harmonic distortion. So, you know, we choose some things to try to manufacture that. And I find, for me, there's a bunch of different ways. You know, J37 is one way. The tube on a Digico thing is not as cool on a transient thing. Like, I like the tube thing on guitars. And some other stuff. But as far as transient goes, the tube thing in the Digico is generally not my go-to. But J37 or Saphira by Waves is a newer kind of harmonic distortion plugin. Or the Sheps Omni channel has
that's a good one.
Has great harmonic distortion in the mic pre side of it, that you can decide whether it's odd or even harmonics and how much of it. So it's just interesting that we've kind of come full circle. It's like, you know, it's more than just the microphone choice on a kick drum, right? We both like the 91, but we are using other tools to get the sound of a kick drum, even when that kick drum sounds amazing. Like, even when Abe Laborious Jr.'s kick drum sounded amazing, I was still putting some harmonic distortion in the front part of it to get that tone. I wasn't doing as much EQ, but I was still using a gate to get that click of the opening. And still using a little bit of compression to, you know, knock the very top of it off so that it was, you know, more dynamic range of it was more kind of in check. So those are all tools to get that ultimate kick drum sound, you know. I find that a digital, so like if you have an M32 or you know, whatever, some lower end desk, and you're trying to get that ultimate kick drum sound, I think those are the things that you need to think about, because a digital desk that doesn't have any harmonic distortion and some pretty bad digital EQ, the reason you're not getting that ultimate kick drum sound is because of all those reasons we just talked about, right?
Exactly. And if I'm in that situation or I just don't have all the tools, I just accept I'm not going to get there. Kind of.
Yeah, I do too. But I'm just saying, you can utilize the knowledge that you now have, that those are the reasons that a kick drum sounds great, right? Totally. And if you only have lesser tools, then still have the knowledge that that's how I get there. So what can I do? Right. Whatever that is, you like, you know, be like, okay, well, if I can figure out a way to get a plugin on this channel, I know I'm going to improve it. You know, it is transient information going through lower end desks that don't have harmonic distortion and bad EQ choices are the reason that those transient things don't sound that great. I want to point that out, that the reason that my kick drum sounds the way that it is not because I just plugged a 91 into a Digico and turned it up.
No, that can be equally as blame. Really?
Totally. Yeah. It is. There is a lot more thought process into a stupid kick drum.
Right. Well, it's funny. You think about everything we just said, like there's the discussion of if I've got a guy that's all over the place. And then we're like, yeah, that's a thing. Then we like literally numerically have to rein him in. Yet every other thing we have mentioned is, well, I use this thing, but I use it because it does this thing. You know what I mean? Like I use this compressor to make the mid-range pop. And then I do this here to do that. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, you're right. It's like it's just that knowledge base in your head of what these tools do and why I'm using them, why I reach for it when I reach for it. You know what I mean?
And then the other thing that I think that we should talk about as we're coming down to the end here, we got like 10 more minutes or so, but the symphony for kick drum problem. Where everybody mixes input number one, like, you know, as if it were a vocal almost. I can't pound it into people's heads enough that standing in front of a drum kit, the loudest drum is always the snare drum. I don't care what drummer it is. It doesn't matter. The loudest drum is always the snare drum, and the kick drum is never the loudest thing.
Never.
Yet when we break it out into individually mic'd things, most sound guys turn that around backwards, where kick drum is super loud and snare drum is less volume than the kick drum. And I think the reason is that the kick drum has the sub impact, and that's when people want emotion in their mix, they're looking for impact. And therefore they're like, okay, the way that I can do that is by turning up the kick drum. But then it makes the whole drum kit be out of relationship of itself. You know what I mean? And then it doesn't sound like a drum kit anymore. And that kick drum is so loud in your mix compared to all the other things. All of a sudden your mix is, you know, yes, it has a little bit of that moving air impact, but it doesn't sound like a mix anymore. So I just want to point that out, and maybe you have something to say about that. It's like the number one thing when I walk into somebody who asks me about their mix, almost every time I go, turn down the kick drum.
Yeah. And what sucks about this is, it is like the punchline, the cliche, like, oh, you mix live sound, right? Huh? Yeah, you must be kick drum. So much so that it's like a thing. And I like have my own little chip on my shoulder about it, to where I've had to get over that over the years and be like, no, but I want that devastating kick drum sound. But I'm so aware of not being, your thing, the whole symphony of kick drum, of not being that. Well, I'll say this. I did a thing the other day for SSL, and I think the question like never actually came to me or something, but it was one of the questions it was worded awkwardly, but it was basically like, what was like the moment, I think they were supposed to be saying in live sound, what was the moment that you like really had that like, oh my God, this is incredible, I love it feeling in live sound? And I would challenge anyone to tell me that story and it not be the first time they pushed up a kick drum on a system that could reproduce stuff, even I think about this alleyway next to Main Street in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, when I had some like real, and they were homemade subs, and I had a D112, and it was a life-changing event.
Sure.
And that's what separates, we've talked about that. That's what separates live sound so much is the physical. So it is such an addictive, it is such a wonderfully powerful, experience that I see why guys get hooked on it. And it's also cheap. It's a cheap trick.
It's a cheap trick.
It is, because it might not even sound good, but if you've got enough 80, 60, 50, 40 moving, you're kind of pounding your chest.
You're like, okay, yeah, I mean, check out my mix.
Right.
But I will tell you that if you can get more nuanced about it and make the low end part of your bass guitar be kind of the main focus of all of those frequencies, with the kick drum just giving it a little bit push in there. If you can get that part right, like I am later on in my years, I've gotten very good at that, like having this bass, right? Of not bass guitar, this BASE in my mix of those frequencies from, whatever, 30 to 100, let's say, that are super impactful and are kind of just there the whole time. They shift from being the kick drum to the bass guitar to some other things that peek down into it, some other guitars and keyboards and, that kind of shit. But there's this connection that if you get the kick drum and the bass guitar correct, my bass guitar ends up being louder in those frequencies than kick drum does pretty much. Like the kick's still there. I'm not saying that it's not, and I'm saying that it has impact. If you're standing in front of my floor subs, there's definitely an impact movement of kick drum. But there's also this bass guitar that's kind of layered almost on top of it. Like it's sitting there. And so those 18s or whatever 21s that are in your subs, depending on what you're using, are kind of just tickling there the whole time. They're not just going cock
right
from kick drum. For me, they're like, hey, we're making information like all the time. With just a little bit of this, you know, from kick drum. And if you get that right, it is so much better than the, you know, typical symphony for kick drum, where you're trying to do something cheap. It's harder to do the other thing.
It is. And it's also just not musical. When the kick drum is just, when you're just getting like bludgeoned it's like, it's not what you mentioned is way more musical. But that being said, oh my God, I know all of us, man, how much fun is it going to be to get out there and pull up a kick drum? You know what I mean? It's like, oh boy, can I not wait? Can I not wait for that?
6 months of symphony for kick drum when we all fucking go back to work for sure.
Absolutely.
But yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to talk about path-wise? Let's see. So we've talked about most of the time it's 2 channels going into, for me, a mono group. That mono group often has additional processing on it just a little bit. It's not where I'm doing some major EQ, but I am also, once I set a kick drum, if there needs to be changes from song to song, I go to the group. I don't go to the individual channels.
Same.
And then also, if there's a day where I feel like the kick drum isn't as cool that day, or something's weird is happening in the kick drum, I almost always leave the channels alone and head for the group to try to, you know, maybe that day it didn't feel like it had enough click or whatever. That's kind of my path. And then, you know, we've talked about this, and this could be a whole other 3-hour conversation about what happens after that. Because there's actually parallel drum compression that makes the actual, it's not just that group then going to the master bus. It's that group going to parallel drum compression that also makes the tone of the kick drum matter as well. So yeah, I mean, it's a series of events that lead to the kick drum sounding good. Here's a question that I get a lot that maybe you can answer. When you are starting and getting your drum tones, are you utilizing parallel drum compression right off the bat?
Yeah. God damn it, I hate this question because it depends. Is the answer. I know. I can also tell you that I go to this. It just depends. Like I know where I'm going to end up, literally to the numeric value of if I just have one parallel bus. I can tell you guys, usually it's somewhere at like negative. I was thinking, it's funny you mentioned this. I was thinking last night, it's usually around negative 5.9. It's so funny. I mean, it's so
funny that you know all these numbers. Like I don't literally don't look and know numbers. Generally,
it's just part of my.
It's weirdness. Part of your thing. I mean, it's what makes us a little bit different than each other. I could not tell you like where my normal setting is on my SSL. I just know.
But I guarantee you with all my heart that you end up at the same place every time.
I'm sure, but I'm just saying it's just funny. I don't know the actual number. So but that's cool that you do, because people can go, oh, okay, -5. I'm going to try it.
But now that's a gain matched version. Everybody, remember that. That's gain matched to a T. That's not just whatever. So I will start. It's a lot of times I don't start with it. It depends on how much time I have. Okay, that's my answer. If I have to get results right away, we have to go like it's like now. Yes, that bus is engaged. It's where it's going to be. The relationship is set, and I'm just like, boom, done. If I've got time, my whole thing is I've got this thing where I want to get as much as I can out of my dry bus. I want to use as little parallel, you know. So it's this ego thing, and then in the end, it always ends up in the same spot. So it depends on how much time.
It's hilarious. I do exactly the same thing. Like if I have no time, if this is going to be a smile and dial, then I am mixing into a full-on parallel 100%. Drum bus. I mean, it is from the beginning. I bring up a kick drum, and it is squashing hard in that crush bus, right? But if I have the time, if I'm doing rehearsals, the parallel compression for me is off. And I utilize parallel compression as if it were a mastering tool or a finalizer. So in other words, I get the kick drum, or I get the entire drum kit to sound great. And then I say, let's put some parallel compression on it and see if it helps. And that's and it always does, by the way.
Yes.
But that's my go-to philosophy, and guys have different opinions about that. Like there's a lot of guys that mix into it, and like I said, I do when I'm throwing and going. But if I've got the time, I don't. So I was curious to know that you do the same thing.
And I'll tell you this too, and maybe I'll hold off. Maybe we'll do. I'm sure we've done something on parallel compression. Maybe we do another one.
Yeah, no, we have.
I will tell you this: if there's no parallel bus and my kick and the snare are like a good solid, basically they're even both sonically, and if you look at the meters, they're both just like it's just crack, 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 crack. I know that when I add the parallel bus in, to me, the kick comes way more forward, and the attack on the kick comes way more forward. Even if on that parallel bus, I'm using some sort of side chain high pass to allow the low end to pass. So a lot of times, once the parallel starts coming in, I will adjust the individual input down. I've just noticed that as a pattern, and that's actually what led me to move into the multiple parallel paths. I was like, I don't like my kick drum. My kick drum comes too far forward, but I love where the snare goes in this bus. Screw it, I'll just make another one. So
yeah, cool.
Whole other discussion.
I also want to be clear, you guys, some of you like follow us to a T and do exactly what I tell you to do, but I want to be clear about this. When I say I'm not using parallel compression, I am still sending all of my drums to 2 stereo buses so that my gain structure is still right. It's not me sending all my drums to a stereo bus and then in the end going, oh, now I'm going to add another bus. Do you know what I mean? It's like both. I'm utilizing 2 stereo buses that have no compression on them until the end, when I'm then adding both compressors into those 2 stereo buses. I just want to make sure that you know that, so that your gain structure ends up being right. If you were sending drums to only a stereo bus, not 2 stereo buses, then as soon as you brought in another second bus, everything would jump doubly pretty much. You know what I mean? So it's just 2 stereo buses, no compression when I first start. Then as a finalizing mastering tool, we insert the compressors on both of those buses. So does that make sense?
Yep, sure does.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of kick drum.
Good. Kick drums. What a nice topic.
Yes. Input number 1. Maybe we'll do input number 3.
Let's go. Let's do it. Let's do simple stuff, fun stuff. This is what people want to think about.
Well, I know, but I mean, there's a lot to be said. Kick drum isn't just a turn it up and send it to your master bus. It can be, if that's the only tool that you have, and whatever, I've done it all the time when I only had a lesser analog console. But in order to get that nuanced killer tone that everyone wants, these are kind of the steps that you and I have had to take to get there. Right.
Yep. 100%.
So cool. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. We got more stuff coming. We were thinking about doing maybe a live stream where you guys could ask us some questions live and we could respond to that live. So we're thinking about doing that. If you're interested in that, comment below, like this comment, and let us know if that's the direction you'd like to go. And thanks for being patient and waiting a couple weeks for this one, and we'll try to do one next week. It just depends on how work's going and if we've got time, and we'll try to do them every week if we can. So thanks for tuning in, and we sure do appreciate you. See you soon.
See you, everybody.